I froze as the door burst open. There she was, my stepdaughter, her eyes wide with shock. "Dad!" she gasped, her voice trembling. My heart pounded as I scrambled to cover myself, but it was too late. The damage was done. In that single moment, everything between us changed forever. I knew there was no coming back from what she had just seen. And what I felt in that instant terrified me. I guess I should start by telling you a bit about myself. My name is David, a 42-year-old single father living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. Life hasn't exactly been easy these past few years. My wife, Emily, passed away 3 years ago after a long battle with cancer, leaving me to raise our daughter, Lily, all on my own. She's 19 now, a freshman at the local college, and trying her best to juggle classes and a part-time job at the diner. We've managed to make it work, but not without sacrifices. My job at the factory keeps me on my feet all day, and most nights I'm so exhausted that I barely have the energy to eat dinner, let alone think about dating or having a social life. And while Lily is independent and mature, I know she still misses her mother deeply. Our house has always felt emptier since Emily's death. It's quiet most of the time, almost too quiet. I try my best to keep things together, cooking, cleaning, paying bills, but some days it feels like I'm just going through the motions. Grief has a way of creeping in when you least expect it. Despite the challenges, Lily and I have always been close. She's smart, kind-hearted, and beautiful. So much like her mother that it's almost painful sometimes. We often spend our evenings watching old movies or talking about her dreams of becoming a writer. But lately something has felt different. There's been a tension in the air that I can't quite explain. Maybe it's just the stress of work, or maybe it's the loneliness getting to me. Whatever it is, I've been feeling more on edge than usual. That night, after another grueling day at work, I came home to an empty house. Lily was pulling a late shift at the diner, and I figured I'd have the place to myself for a while. I grabbed a beer from the fridge, kicked off my boots, and headed upstairs to unwind. I didn't know then that my world was about to be turned upside down. I didn't know that by the end of the night, nothing between us would ever be the same again. The days leading up to that night had felt heavier than usual. I tried to convince myself it was just exhaustion, but deep down, I knew something else was gnawing at me. Lily had been acting off. She'd started coming home later than usual, sometimes skipping dinner entirely. When I'd ask about her schedule, she'd give vague answers or change the subject. Her phone, which used to sit out in the open, was now always clutched in her hand or tucked away in her pocket. I wanted to brush it off. She's 19, I told myself. She's just growing up, finding her independence. But the uneasy feeling wouldn't leave me. Then there were the glances, quick, almost accidental, but I noticed. The way her eyes lingered a little too long when we crossed paths in the hallway, or when she caught me shirtless after a shower. I tried to ignore it, but my mind kept circling back. Was I imagining things? Or was there something she wasn't saying? One night, I stayed up late waiting for her to come home. It was past midnight when I heard the front door creak open. I stepped into the living room just as she walked in. "Lily," I said, making her jump. "Oh my God, Dad. You scared me." She clutched her chest, her breathing quick. "Where have you been?" "At work," she replied too quickly. "I picked up an extra shift." Her voice was shaky, and her eyes darted away from mine. I didn't press. I couldn't. Instead, I just nodded and said, "Okay." But I knew something wasn't right. The following morning, she avoided me entirely. No good morning like usual, no casual chatter about her classes. Just silence. And every time I tried to talk, she brushed me off, claiming she was tired or busy. Later that day, I walked past her room and saw the door slightly ajar. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, staring at her phone with a look I couldn't quite place. Sadness? Confusion? I knocked softly. "Hey, you okay?" She startled and shoved her phone under a pillow. "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Just tired." I didn't believe her. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to answer. Was she seeing someone? Was something bothering her that she didn't feel comfortable telling me? Or was it something else entirely? Something that had been building between us without either of us realizing it? When I finally drifted off, it wasn't for long. I woke up drenched in sweat, my chest tight with unease. And then it happened. The door creaked open. At first, I thought I was dreaming. But then I felt it, a presence close and warm. My eyes shot open, and there she was. "Lily," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "I couldn't sleep," she said softly. "Can I stay here for a bit?" I should have said no. I should have told her to go back to her room. But I didn't. Instead, I scooted over, letting her climb into bed beside me. Her head rested against my chest, and as the seconds ticked by, I felt my heart pounding harder. I told myself it was innocent. She was just scared, just lonely. But as her fingers brushed against mine and her breath warmed my neck, I knew this was more than that. And I didn't know how to stop it. I lay there frozen, my heart pounding as Lily's breath tickled my neck. Her body pressed lightly against mine, and I struggled to keep my thoughts in check. This is wrong, I told myself. She's just scared. She misses her mom. She needs comfort. But then her fingers curled against my chest, and I felt her trembling. Lily, I whispered, my voice tight, you shouldn't be here. She didn't pull away. Instead, her grip tightened. I'm sorry, she murmured. I feel so alone sometimes. Ever since Mom died, it's like no one really sees me anymore. Except you. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything was going to be okay. But the way she looked at me in that moment made my stomach churn. Lily, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, I do see you. I always have. But this isn't right. She sat up slightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Why not? She asked softly. I swallowed hard. Because I'm your father. And you're my daughter. Stepdaughter, she corrected, her voice barely above a whisper. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Don't, I said sharply, sitting up and creating distance between us. Don't say that. It doesn't matter. But it does, she insisted. We're not really related, Dad. And I can't stop thinking about you. I've tried, but I can't. Her confession hung in the air like poison. My pulse quickened, and I had to force myself to breathe. This isn't love, Lily, I said, trying to keep my voice firm. You're confused. You're lonely. And so am I. But this isn't the answer. She reached for my hand, her fingers brushing against mine. Then what is? She asked, her voice breaking. Because I don't know how to stop feeling this way. Tears welled in her eyes, and I felt my resolve cracking. I should have pushed her away. I should have ended it right there. But instead, I reached out and wiped a tear from her cheek. We'll figure this out, I said, though my voice felt hollow. She leaned into my touch, and for a brief moment, I let my guard down. It was a mistake, one I'd regret almost instantly. Her lips brushed against my cheek, lingering just a second too long. My breath hitched, and I pulled away quickly. Lily, no, I said, standing up and putting as much distance between us as I could. This can't happen. Ever. She looked hurt, devastated, but didn't argue. Instead, she nodded slowly, wiping her tears as she stood. I'm sorry, she whispered. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. Before I could say another word, she rushed out of the room, leaving me standing there, heart pounding and mind racing. I wanted to convince myself that it was over, that we could move past this and pretend it never happened. But the truth was, the damage had already been done. The next morning, things were tense. Lily avoided me entirely, barely speaking more than a few words before rushing out the door for class. I tried to focus on work, but my mind kept replaying the night before. The look in her eyes, the desperation in her voice, the way my body had betrayed me, even if just for a moment. When I got home that evening, she was already there, sitting on the couch, her eyes red and puffy. We need to talk, she said quietly. I sat down, bracing myself for what was coming. I can't stay here anymore, she said, her voice trembling. I thought I could handle it, but I can't. Every time I look at you, it hurts. I don't know what's wrong with me. My chest tightened. There's nothing wrong with you, I said softly. You're grieving. We both are. But we need help, Lily. Real help. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't want to feel this way, she admitted. But I don't know how to stop. We'll figure it out, I promised. Together. But this, what happened last night, can never happen again. She wiped her tears and looked at me with a vulnerability that broke my heart. Okay, she whispered. But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The tension in the house was unbearable after that night. Lily and I barely spoke, and when we did, the words felt hollow, forced. I knew she was trying to act normal, but the weight of what had happened lingered in every glance, every awkward pause. I told myself things would settle down, that we'd find a way to move past it. But deep down I knew better. It all came to a head one evening when I came home earlier than usual. The house was quiet, but something felt off. Lily's bedroom door was slightly open, and as I walked closer, I heard muffled sounds, soft, shaky breaths. Lily? I called out, knocking gently. No answer. Concerned, I pushed the door open, and my heart dropped. She was sitting on the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her face, holding a picture of her mother. The room was a mess, clothes scattered, books thrown to the floor. "Lily?" I stepped inside carefully. She looked up at me, her eyes wild with emotion. "I can't do this anymore, Dad," she choked out. I froze. "Do what?" "Pretend that everything's okay. Pretend that I don't feel this way." She stood abruptly, the picture frame clattering to the floor. I thought I could ignore it, but I can't. I stepped closer, my hands raised to calm her. "Lily, listen." "No, you listen," she shouted, tears falling faster. "I've tried to push these feelings away, but they keep coming back. I don't know what's wrong with me." Her words hit me like a freight train. My instincts screamed at me to run, to end the conversation before it went any further. But I couldn't leave her like this. "Nothing is wrong with you," I said softly, stepping closer. "You're hurting. We both are. But we can't let this." Before I could finish, she crossed the room and threw herself into my arms, her body trembling against mine. "I just want to feel close to someone again," she whispered. "I feel so empty all the time." I held her, my mind racing. I wanted to comfort her, to make her feel safe. But the way she clung to me, the way her body pressed into mine, it felt dangerous. "Lily, we can't." She pulled back just enough to look into my eyes, her face inches from mine. "Why not?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Who's going to know? Who's going to care?" Her words sent a jolt of fear through me. "This isn't about other people," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's about us. About what's right." She didn't move. "Then tell me you don't feel it too," she said, her eyes searching mine. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. She took my silence as confirmation. Before I could react, she leaned in, her lips brushing against mine. I pulled away sharply, my heart pounding. "No." She stepped back, her face crumpling. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I don't know why I did that." I ran my hands through my hair, trying to steady my breathing. "Lily, this can't happen. Ever." She nodded quickly, wiping at her tears. "I know. I'm sorry. But the damage was done." I spent the rest of the night pacing in my room, replaying the moment over and over. I kept asking myself how we'd gotten here. How grief and loneliness had twisted something so innocent into something dangerous. I knew we couldn't ignore it anymore. We needed help. The next morning, I sat her down at the kitchen table. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm but calm. She avoided my eyes but nodded. "What happened last night, it can't happen again. Ever." "I know," she whispered. "We're going to find someone to talk to," I continued. "A therapist. Someone who can help us work through this. Both of us." She looked up then, her eyes filled with desperation. "And if it doesn't help? What if I still feel this way?" "It will help," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. "But we have to be honest, with each other and with ourselves." She nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes. "Okay," she said quietly. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like we were finally taking a step in the right direction. But the truth was, even as we made plans for therapy and set boundaries, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Because deep down I knew there were some lines that, once crossed, could never truly be erased. The morning after our talk, the house felt heavier than ever. Lily barely spoke as she grabbed her keys and left for class, and I didn't blame her. I was just as lost as she was. I spent the day pacing the living room, replaying every word, every glance, every touch. The more I thought about it, the more ashamed I felt. Not just for her, for me. I was supposed to be the adult, the one who set boundaries and protected her. Instead, I'd let things spiral so far out of control that I wasn't sure if we could fix it. That night, she came home late. I was sitting on the couch nursing my third beer when the door opened, and she stepped inside. "Hey," I said cautiously. "Hey." She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her shoulders slumped. I wanted to say something comforting, but nothing came to mind. "Dinner's in the fridge," I said instead. "Not hungry," she muttered, heading straight for the stairs. I watched her disappear down the hall and felt the ache in my chest grow stronger. This wasn't working. I told myself we just needed time to let the tension fade, time to rebuild trust. But as the days dragged on, things only got worse. She stopped talking to me entirely, and when we were in the same room, it felt like we were walking on glass. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the look in her eyes, the fear, the desperation, the longing. One night, I heard her crying in her room. The sound tore through me, but I didn't go to her. I couldn't risk making things worse. Instead, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling and wondering how we'd gotten here. Then the breaking point came. I came home from work to find her bags packed by the door. She was sitting on the couch, her head down, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. "What's this?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. "I'm leaving," she said softly. "Leaving? Where?" "To stay with a friend." I took a step closer, my heart pounding. "Lily, wait. We can fix this." She finally looked up at me, and the pain in her eyes nearly brought me to my knees. "No, we can't," she said. "I need space. I need to figure out who I am without this." I opened my mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because she was right. I watched helplessly as she grabbed her bags and walked out the door, leaving me standing there broken. The days that followed were the longest of my life. I texted her, called her, sometimes just to check if she was okay, other times because I couldn't stand the silence. She responded, but her messages were short, distant. "I'm fine. Still figuring things out. Need more time." I threw myself into work, trying to drown out the guilt and loneliness. But every night, I came home to an empty house that felt colder than ever. The worst part was knowing I couldn't blame her for leaving. She needed space, and maybe I did too. But the silence was deafening. A month passed before she agreed to meet for coffee. I showed up early, nervous and unsure of what to expect. When she finally walked in, I barely recognized her. She looked stronger somehow, more sure of herself. We sat down, and for a few moments neither of us spoke. "How've you been?" I finally asked. "Better," she said. "I've been seeing a therapist." I nodded. "That's good." She looked at me then, and for the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of the girl I used to know. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For everything." I swallowed hard. "You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do." She paused, taking a deep breath. "I was confused and hurting, and I made things complicated. But I'm working through it. I know now that what I felt wasn't real. It was just grief and loneliness mixed up in my head." I felt my chest tighten, but I forced myself to smile. "I'm proud of you," I said, "for facing this head-on." She smiled back, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. The ride home was quiet, but it didn't feel as heavy as before. We still had a long way to go, trust to rebuild, wounds to heal, but at least now we were on the right track. And as I pulled into the driveway, I finally allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could move forward. The days that followed our meeting at the coffee shop were slow, but they felt lighter, like a fog had finally started to lift. Lily didn't come home right away. She needed more time, and I respected that. We stayed in touch, exchanging texts and phone calls more frequently. Little by little, our conversations became easier, less strained. She told me about her therapy sessions, how she was learning to process her grief in healthier ways. She even encouraged me to start seeing someone too, and though I hesitated at first, I eventually agreed. Therapy wasn't easy. Facing my own loneliness, my guilt, and the emotional walls I'd built was painful. But it was necessary. I learned how the loss of my wife had left a void I'd tried to fill with work, routine, and distraction. Anything to avoid confronting how broken I felt inside. And Lily? She'd been dealing with the same emptiness, only she didn't have the life experience or tools to handle it. The bond we shared had always been close, but grief had twisted it into something neither of us had seen coming. It wasn't love, not the way it had seemed in the heat of the moment. It was a desperate search for connection, for safety in a world that suddenly felt unpredictable and cruel. In time, I started seeing the changes in both of us. Lily found new friends at school, and even started dating again. She laughed more, and when she spoke about her future, there was excitement in her voice. Watching her grow stronger made me realize how much I'd been holding her back by leaning on her for emotional support. And me? I focused on building a life outside of my role as her father. I joined a support group for widowers, started hitting the gym, and even went on a couple of dates. Not that any of them turned serious, but it was a step forward. Lily eventually moved back home, though things were different this time. We set boundaries, both physical and emotional, and made an effort to keep the lines between parent and child clear. It wasn't always easy, but it was worth it. One evening, we sat on the porch watching the sun set, and she turned to me with a soft smile. "You know, for a while there, I thought we'd never get back to this," she said. "Me too," I admitted. "But we made it through." She nodded and looked out at the horizon. "Mom would be proud of us," she said quietly. Her words hit me in a way I wasn't expecting, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't feel weighed down by guilt or sadness. Instead, I felt peaceful. I reached over and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "She would," I said. "I think we're finally starting to figure this out." And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Moral reflection. Grief has a way of twisting emotions, of blurring lines, and making you question yourself. But what matters most is recognizing when you've crossed a boundary and having the courage to step back, ask for help, and do the hard work to heal. Lily and I weren't perfect. We made mistakes, big ones, but we faced them together. We didn't let shame or fear define us. Instead, we fought to rebuild trust, respect, and love the right way. Because no matter how dark things might seem, there's always a way back to the light. You just have to be willing to fight for it. What would you have done in their situation? Could you forgive and move forward, or would the damage be too much to repair? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found this story gripping, make sure to like and subscribe for more shocking and emotional tales that push the boundaries of love, betrayal, and redemption. Stay tuned, because the next story will leave you speechless.